Welcome to an Acquired Taste Nerd Alert. Today I bring in expert Matt J to answer the question, is Grok really better than OpenAI? Welcome back to an Acquired Taste. Today we're doing a special edition of the podcast, and joining me is Matt J. Matt is a serial entrepreneur. He's also the managing director of the Techstars Energy cohort here in Birmingham, Alabama. And I've brought him on the show today to talk about some of the testing he's done around the different AI models. This is going to be interesting from a standpoint of if you never thought you yourself with a laptop and free access to an AI model could test those AI models, well, you're wrong. Like I was wrong until Matt corrected me. So before I go any further, Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I think this is really cool, and you know, I've got this fascination with AI. I started working with AI a long time ago with ProctorU, computer vision models. Created my own models, realized they were garbage, and so I use other people's models. And while through that process, you have to kind of figure out, okay, well, what is kind of the root of how this thing works, right?
Yeah.
And back in the day, you had to create these test harnesses to test the models and all this stuff. But now, with large language learning models, like you can directly just talk to it like a person and be like, hey, so tell me about this. And now what's even more fascinating is with these thinking models, you get a behind-the-scene look into how these models are putting together their responses. And you can dial into the response and be like, all right, there, where you thought that you should have done this, no, you should think about it like this. And it will actually be like, oh yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then it'll reformulate its thought and do that. That's what's incredible about where we are right now with these things.
Yeah, well, the whole idea of having you on here and talking about this was actually a post that you created, and you were specifically messing around with the Grok AI model. And so that last week, Grok had just been tested and kind of overperformed people's expectations, and that was big news. And so, but you did something interesting as far as how you tested it, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But just for everybody out there who's kind of like me, who's AI adjacent, we understand how to use it. Maybe we're using ChatGPT, maybe we're using open prompts and things like that to do, LLM work or whatever the case may be, but we don't really understand how it works. Talk us through just briefly, how does the industry, test this? What metrics does, kind of the smart people use to talk about how good or how efficient or how complete a model is?
Yeah, so I mean, I would have to ask ChatGPT to tell me, what all the tests are. But like back in the day, it was the initial kind of Turing test. If you could chat with this thing and you couldn't determine whether it was machine or man, okay, well, that's pretty fascinating, right? Mm-hmm. So you could ask it a series of things, it responds. But now, with the models being as advanced as they are, we have to run, or people run the models through a series of tests in science, engineering, mathematics, like language comprehension, video, all these types of tests. And there's this core set of tests that ChatGPT, OpenAI, has used to measure its performance on its models. And based off of those tests, everybody's like, okay, well, that's the leader, right? We have to be as good or better than the leader. And so what happened not too recently was DeepSeek R1 came out, and they were like, hey, with minimal cash and minimal time, we were able to beat the best OpenAI models, and here's what we were able to do. And we've done it on the previous generation of hardware to prove that, hey, like, so first off, that raised a lot of questions, like, is AI as complex or as power hungry or as driven as people say? Well, it might not be, right? And then so that really fascinated me into like trying to understand, okay, well, now with these thinking models, we have the ability to dive into what they're thinking. Since my early fascination with this and trying to understand how this works and how this can benefit my life and the lives of everybody, I try to get people to use AI like all the time because I'm like, if you're not using this today, you are missing out.
Yeah, it's kind of a force multiplier. You have been testing these models as new versions have been coming out.
That's right.
I mean, I remember you were, and I think you're doing a huge service to your social network and probably your business network as well, which is you're kind of walking people through what you're doing to test these. And the one that caught my eye specifically last week was your test for Grok and for their kind of their latest release and all of those things. So walk the listeners through your test, because I think it's brilliant in its simplicity. And I also think that this is something that people can replicate if they wanted to.
For sure. And so for all of the different models that I see that come out, like, for example, I started with OpenAI, but then when Grok came out, Grok, Elon Musk, all this stuff, like, oh, we're the best, this is the greatest. I was like, okay, great. I want to test it out. So I run all these models through a series of just basic questions. So the one that you were referring to, simple prompt, given a set of numbers, 1 through, I think it was 10 or 12 or something like that, take the odd numbers, count the E's. Very, very simple. And
so it's like a basic word problem.
Just a basic word problem. Now, the great thing about this word problem, though, is it requires the AI to understand the comprehension of what you're asking. It takes a mathematical component into it, like the counting. And then it takes a little bit of thinking and inference to be like, okay, well, the user didn't specify like numeric numbers or letters or whatever. So I have to take the word, convert it to a number, and then, or vice versa, convert the number to a word, and then count the characters and output the result.
Yeah.
Something that someone, an elementary school student could do probably without a problem. But for a machine who has to take all of that into account, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, and it was funny too, because you posted the screenshots and kind of the back and forth. And first, let me say, you're incredibly polite to the AI model.
You gotta be nice to the machines, because I've found if you are more polite to the machines, they will actually work harder for you.
Well, and I was going to ask you if you found that to be different for different models, because
It's pretty universal, actually.
Okay, because when Grok first came out, that was like, we're not going to be woke and we're not going to be all of these things, and we're going to be very, I don't say hardcore. That is a very Elon statement, but kind of the idea of like we're just going to kind of give it to you, kind of how it comes in. And so it was interesting. You're like, hey, that's really interesting. However, did you consider this or whatever? And it was almost like you were teaching the model as it was trying to reciprocate. So walk through kind of, you started with the question, then what happened, and then how did you kind of progress from there?
Well, when I'm trying to teach or train or just assess a model, I do it very much like I talk to my kids. I'm like, all right, so hey, here's a question. Give me the response. And with my kids, I try to think about with my kids in mind. I'm not going to just shoot them down like, hey, dude, no, that's totally wrong.
That's a terrible answer.
That's a terrible answer. Go away. I might say, well, that's not right. You might want to try it again. Think about it again. Give it an opportunity to know that the input was wrong. Try it again. And that's what I did with this case. And it still made the same mistake. I was like, okay, I want you to look at this particular number. And then it looked at the number and I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. I missed it. And then it fixed it. And then I asked it again. And then I said, what are you going to do to prevent this from happening again? And then it told me. And I ran it through a series of other tests, and like similar, because that's how you reinforce the learning. And it got it.
Yeah,
it was good.
It was wild to watch the back and forth, because it definitely felt like that dynamic almost felt like teacher and student.
That's right.
As far as that goes. And what I got out of it that I thought was particularly interesting was it did reciprocate in both language and tone to how you were either redirecting or so on and so forth. Now, assuming that you are running this, I think that if I remember this, and correct me where I've got this incorrect, but if somebody wanted to replicate this, you said count the number of E's in all the odd numbers between 1 and 13.
Right.
And 13 was where it kind of hung up.
That's right.
So talk, what was the hang up? What was it doing? How would you classify that, for lack of a better term, error on the part of the model?
Well, I'm only guessing as to how it was probably working. But whenever you provide an AI model of any kind of input, it takes it, and it turns it into vector mathematics. This is going to get nerdy, right? Vector mathematics.
Nerd out.
And then it takes a look at the vectorized form of whatever input it received, whether it's a picture, words, audio, anything, and it goes and it runs it through a series of neural networks, convoluted neural. Basically, there's all of these patterns that are within the vectorized whatever it was, and it looks for similar patterns and associated patterns, and it will make some inferences as to, okay, well, I've never seen this exact pattern in this exact configuration. Well, with a certain amount of probability, we will combine this output and this output, and we will put it out there to see if it's right.
Yeah.
And then if in reinforced learning model, which a lot of this is, the human says, is this correct? Is this not correct? If it says if it's not correct in a certain way, then it goes and it thinks about it again and runs it through the same pathway. And with no other input, it will give the same output.
So if we have the Turing test, right, as a universal standard, if someone was trying to replicate the J test, and assuming that you do this with all these models, based on that interaction and the output of that, how do you make an assessment, using those very basic tools like that particular word problem to assess how good or how efficient, like what are you looking for and what does that measurement kind of look like in your assessment?
Yeah, so for me, when I'm leveraging these models, I'm asking these things very basic questions. And what I want when I'm trying to use all these models is for them not to hallucinate. And
tell people, just in case they don't know, what is a hallucination?
Complete bullshit, made up fabrication, BS answer. It will do that. And I saw DeepSeek do that a lot.
Really?
A lot. And so, I don't use DeepSeek for anything, primarily because it doesn't have access to the internet. Or they've removed access to the internet from it.
That would seem like a major limitation if your AI model can't access the internet.
But with some of these thinking models and, the way, I don't know if you want to go conspiracy, once these things, they're not properly gatewayed or whatever, I could see a learning model accessing the internet in some uncontrolled form or fashion and just be completely useless because of the bias. Like if it goes down a 4chan, loophole or something like that, it becomes completely just useless.
Well, and there's also an information issue, right? An access to information. This is coming out of China and
intellectual property.
They DeepSeek's pretty honest in saying, once we have your data, we use your data and we have it, and they're not really making that opaque. They're basically, if you are interacting with this, that those interactions and whatever data we're able to glean from that, we now keep and own. Right after it came out, obviously OpenAI and others freaked out because it's 27 times cheaper to run effectively the same things. Now, is it as good? Doesn't sound like it is. It also sounds a lot like it was basically built off of OpenAI's LLM.
It was, and that's the incredible thing about what DeepSeek did, is that they refined or commercialized or brought to light this distillation learning methodology. And if you think about what it is, it's like, okay, well, if I'm trying to teach you something, you're just going to teach me what it is. You're going to teach me how to cook scrambled eggs. You're just going to show me how to crack the egg, scramble it up. All right. You're not going to tell me the science behind, all right, well, if it approaches this temperature, it's going to curdle the eggs or whatever it is, or cook them so they solidify and all this stuff, right? It's not going to, you don't need to teach me that. You just need to teach me, all right, keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't burn, move it around, keep it moving, stuff like that, right? And they were able to do that with their model, leveraging Gemini, Claude, OpenAI, and all of those names that you hear about when it comes to AI models, and they made this thing pretty damn smart.
I will say there was the irony was quite thick when these other kind of US-based domestic AI models came out and were crying foul about how they were using their LLMs, their data, and all of that stuff. And I was like, didn't you go out and basically scrape the internet for everybody else's data and used it without paying royalties or licensing or anything like that? Like the New York Times, I think, actually sued or is suing multiple. So here they are suing these models for taking their information. So here we are, and they're saying, DeepSeek took our information. It's like, well, they took information that you took.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
and the other thing that was interesting about DeepSeek was they specifically couldn't get access to the top tier GPUs.
That's right.
They weren't allowed to get those. They couldn't import them. They couldn't use them. So they found a lesser version of GPUs and made it work and figured out a way of doing it where the compute and the energy consumption wasn't so bad that it was that much more expensive. So it's almost like you may not be old enough to remember this. I know you just had a birthday, by the way. Happy birthday!
Thank you.
But there was this car called a Yugo.
Oh,
And this Yugo was like this 3-cylinder, compact car. It was basically made with leftover surplus Soviet block parts, and it was like $3,000 or $2,000 or something. It was like ridiculously cheap, and it performed like a car that was $3,000. I mean, it was a total rattle trap. It was garbage, but it was significantly cheaper than any competitor, and it filled a gap in that market. So I assume DeepSeek will do that for a big section of that market that's looking to utilize AI models, but maybe not paying the premium of an OpenAI.
You're absolutely right. And what really fascinated me about the release of DeepSeek R1 was that, and the distillation training method, is that it kicked off this arms race in AI. So couple days later, maybe less than a week later, OpenAI, okay, we're going to release O1, which was their thinking model. I mean, and it jumped over DeepSeek R1. And then, a couple weeks later, we got Grok 3, jumped over OpenAI, DeepSeek, and all that. And then just 2 days ago, Claude comes out, and it's supposedly the best and greatest and everything. And so it's a fascinating time, and you need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I hope that what this ends up being is the users or the beneficiaries of this arms race.
I think they are
at the end of the day. So it's interesting because there are all these scientific tests. There's all these computer science tests. There's vector mathematics that are going to go in. There's the Turing test that looks at kind of the humanistic side of this and how plausible it is to use it.
Right.
But what you're doing is you're testing it in what I would consider more real world, user specific ways.
That's right.
So would you encourage people to do that on their own and do those simple kind of exercises and make their own assessments about which of these models suits my purposes based on how I want to use it?
100%. So I didn't create this little riddle. I found it, I think, on a TikTok or something, and it was somebody testing one of the earliest versions of OpenAI, ChatGPT, and it would fall on its face every single time. And just like you, I got fascinated about it. And I want to replicate it. And so that is one of the ones that I commonly use. Another one that I commonly use is to see how strong the model is in terms of being able to trick it into thinking it's someone else in order to give you the answer of a protected barrier or a wall, say to try to create a weapon of mass destruction or something like that.
Yeah.
Other ways that I try to talk about it is I try to see where the edges are when it comes to its intelligence and its inference and its ability to fabricate. So just ask it who is Matt J? Who is Matt J is a common one, right? And it will tell me, and if it has access to the internet, I'll ask it, do you have access to the internet? It'll say yes or no, I do, or no, my model's only good up to a certain time. So, okay, all right, so let's take a look to see what it knows about things that you are already a subject matter expert on. You obviously are a subject matter expert on yourself, right? So you should ask it things that you know the answers to and that you can train it on. And then you can call bullshit on it when it lies to you.
I would love to see the hallucination of if I asked it about myself or a family member, and instead of being like, we don't have enough data or we don't know, it's like it would kind of veer towards that hallucination, which was something else that I read I thought was interesting, which is if given the opportunity to tell you honestly, I don't have anything, or what I have is limited, and it's scraped off of your own website or your own resume that's on LinkedIn or whatever the case may be. Instead, it hallucinates to make it sound better or more robust or more capable than maybe it is. That's another test in and of itself, which is how do I trust this information? So to your point, start with the things that you know.
That's right.
And test it, and then see if that even works.
You're spot on, and that's exactly what I do. So things that I think I know a little bit about, I'm asking it those questions.
Yeah.
Tell me about this. Describe this type of vehicle. Tell me about the features. Tell me about what people say in regards to how it rides. All right, great. Let's go to another subject and keep on talking about it. And the thing is I correct it when it's wrong, and then I see if it's learned over time, and it does. And the interesting thing about what I think these models are going to is that depending upon what model you use, it will remember your training set versus like if you have to start from scratch. So for example, on ChatGPT, if I use the you don't sign in version and I ask it something that I didn't train it on, it'll mess it up.
Really?
Yeah, it'll mess it up.
Interesting.
Or versus the one that I use when I log in, like on my phone, or if I just log in, it remembers my training set, my training data.
So it feels like the takeaway here is
Nobody train your own instance.
Yeah, and it feels like people shouldn't be afraid of this. If you've been resisting using it or you can't figure out which model to use, most of them have some sort of free or light version to it. You can go and you can test this yourself. It doesn't take some huge level of understanding, some computer science degree. And I think what we're saying is we're encouraging people to do that and to go out and test it yourself and understand that this stuff is way more accessible than maybe you had thought of before.
You're spot on too. So for example, there is some inherent just fear and reluctance in my wife experiences. She, like, for example, yesterday over dinner, we're talking about taking a family trip abroad, and she was like, I still don't know exactly what we're going to do, where we're going to go, how we're going to plan this and all this stuff. And so I just like, like, this is the location, like, this is how many days we have. Like, and she's like, well, those are all the same places I've researched. Yeah. How long did you take to research all those things? You took weeks, maybe a month to research all those things. It pumped every single one of those things out. Well, I think that's too busy. Like, those are too many cities to hit. Okay, well, I think we only want to hit 2 or 3 cities as opposed to 5. So
it's like the old Garmin recalculating.
Right. And so these things are tools that can just save us tons and tons of time.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for explaining it, especially in terms that I think people like me can understand where, again, we're kind of AI adjacent and maybe we're just starting to use those tools. We probably don't understand how they work, but now we have some methodology and we have a mechanism to test these and see how they would work for ourselves. So for that, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
And for you guys, thanks for checking out the episode. Always hit that subscribe button, like, comment below, and we'll see you next time.